That's the Brooklyn Bridge. 120,000 cars cross that every single day. It's a span between Lower Manhattan, which is the financial district of the world, and Brooklyn. It's a destination. Right here also is where weather changed the war.
This country owes everything to its veterans, the men and women who fought to give us and protect our freedoms. From the Revolutionary War to present day, Americans have fought with courage and strategy, and sometimes with the weather. It's August 1776. The former colonies of America have declared their independence and freed Boston from British control. 5 months later, royal forces have now concentrated on the port of New York, hoping to cripple the infant country by choking off their trade. They clashed with the Revolutionary Army in what would become known as the Battle of Brooklyn. Let's get to the stone arch. The opening is beautiful here. It's like you're in bustling Brooklyn. You hang a left, and all of a sudden, you see this huge Gothic entrance. And you're like, this is Brooklyn? It's amazing. It's so different from the middle of downtown Brooklyn today. This is where the Battle of Brooklyn started. We're driving up the Battle Hill right now. That's where we had the bloodiest battle, and it's where the British lost the most amount of their people in just a morning span. Where the hell am I going? It's this way. The weather back then, though, it was in the middle of the Little Ice Age, so even in late August, it really wasn't that hot. Temperatures were climbing up into the upper 70s. That was early in the morning of the 27th, right before the battle started. It was certainly humid because there was a storm brewing that nobody knew about. The Little Ice Age was a time period between 1300 to 1850 AD, where the average temperature around the North Atlantic fell by 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit compared to today. Yeah, the Revolutionary War fell right in there. 570,000 people are buried here. It's hard to imagine it's that many. And I can't even believe this is in the middle of Brooklyn. It's absolutely stunning. It's quiet, it's peaceful. Back in 1776, I couldn't even imagine being a 14-year-old Continental soldier sitting around this hill, watching the British just amass their boats out in the New York harbor. I couldn't even imagine what was going through their minds. Yeah, it's a little chilly this morning, no doubt about it. Typical fall morning. But if it weren't for the city noises and the airplanes going by, you would never know that this is Brooklyn. I'm in the Greenwood Cemetery, and you can see for miles. You can see the Freedom Tower right there in Lower Manhattan. You can see the Statue of Liberty in the harbor. You can see the Hudson River. It is fantastic. But right now, I am headed to the highest natural elevation in Brooklyn to show you exactly where a turning point in the Revolutionary War happened.
So this is what we now call Battle Hill. It was the highest point in Brooklyn, and it was a promontory in the 18th century where the Continental Army laid out its first line of defense in advance of the Battle of Long Island.
Yeah, if you couldn't tell, Justin Constantino is way into history.
So what did we see coming up the hill on the 27th?
Well, you're going to see columns of British regulars in their resplendent reds.
Are they coming from every direction?
Mostly from up the flats and up the hill. One thing that is kind of difficult to comprehend, particularly in our modern sensibilities, is I kind of look a little silly today.
Nah.
But this would terrify somebody back in the day. The shining buttons, the height of the hat, especially grenadiers with their bear skins and Highlanders with their pipes and their drums. The British had already been encamped at Gravesend in Flatbush Village, kind of on the outwash plain going back towards the Narrows. So you would have seen troops moving, you would have seen encampments, you would have certainly heard, the drums and the pipes going and all those things, but then they would get closer.
Yeah.
And eventually you would start to hear sporadic exchange of fire, and then eventually the battle becomes joined in the wee hours of the morning at the Red Lion Tavern on the road, approaching this position on the American right.
Can you imagine being a 14-year-old just sitting there watching the British amass their forces right in front of you like that?
It must have been an absolutely surreal thing, because what you have to kind of understand is Howe comes over here with thousands of men and easily doubles the population of Staten Island when he arrives with his troops.
Jeez.
It's difficult to imagine, but this is the 18th century in New York.
Wow.
So here you are standing here where we are because of this geography, which is kind of rare on Long Island, which is notorious for being flat.
Yeah.
But here on one of the few hills, this becomes the first line of defense. Main American defense is in Brooklyn Heights, and a line of fortifications between the headwaters of Gowanus Creek over there behind us up to Wallabout Bay where the Brooklyn Navy Yard is. And this first line stretches from the Gowanus Creek all the way out to Jamaica Pass. Pretty much the whole length of the Kings County, what is now the borough of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And there are 4 main passes through these hills. And so it seems very simple. You put your men and your guns on top of the hill, you protect the passes, and you prevent the British from marching their columns through and then getting to the main breastworks.
Yeah.
Because this is all about defending New York City ultimately.
So how do we get up on top of the hill?
What ends up happening is in the summer of 1776, after the success of the siege of Boston, the Continental Army comes to New York, imagining this is going to be where the Empire strikes back.
Right.
And they begin to fortify New York City and try to determine where they can best protect it. And Brooklyn Heights, behind us, where the main American fortification was, made for a good position to either that was the linchpin of New York. You would control entrance into the East River and up to the Hell Gate, the Long Island Sound, as well as a position to potentially lay fire into the city.
Right.
So it becomes clear that that is what needs to be defended.
Even with today's skyscrapers, you can see what an advantage this hill was for whoever could control it. Whoever wins this position wins the Battle of Brooklyn.
So this is where everyone starts to flee.
As the line breaks down on these lines, Sterling and his position holds, or at least as the men are withdrawing, they're withdrawing in formation, and they're not, breaking ranks and, like every man for himself. Although that does start to happen, and ultimately, as Sterling withdraws, kind of further up towards Park Slope, where the old stone house is, and then kind of holds there. That allows much of the army to withdraw, get over the Gowanus Creek, get back over the American defensive line.
What's at stake if the Americans lose this entire position, if they lose their army?
Losing the army ultimately becomes what would mean the death of the revolution.
So he almost blew it at this point right here.
Yes, the revolution, we almost died in the cradle 2 weeks less, 2 months, less than that, after we declared independence.
Going to the site of the battle, listening to Justin speak, it makes it clear just how dire of a situation we were in.
When you look at the X's and O's, if you will, it's really quite amazing that so much of the Continental Army got out of this situation intact. But then, of course, they're only then bottled up in those breastworks.
Yeah.
Because now, the Americans lose this position. And so now, they still control the entrance to the East River, but now there's an army to the left, and we're waiting for the wind to change, for the Navy to come up the right, and then that situation, particularly with no naval support for the Americans, becomes very untenable. Now we're looking at, do we stay holed up in Brooklyn Heights? Do we try to force this issue? Do we evacuate New York entirely? Do we surrender the army? Certainly that's what, the Howe brothers are anticipating. And so, while we're waiting for the wind to change, for the Navy to come up the river, Howe rests his army, entrenches himself, and then begins to do the classic European thing of digging his lines ever so closer to the American breastworks. And then it doesn't matter how well dug in the Americans are, once the British can arch their shots over our walls, we're cooked. we're the ones in the defensive position.
That's
we have to
amazing.
react to them. Because Washington, even though, yes, he is in command here, doesn't arrive until the battle is already joined at the Red Lion Tavern. He's thinking that this move onto the island, because Howe only comes over with half the army, is just a feint.
Yeah.
That he's going to get all the Americans out of New York, and then it's just going to be a matter of waiting for the wind to change and having his brother land with the Navy, and then boom, fait accompli.
Speaking of that, the weather that morning was nice. It was humid. It was on the warm side. They didn't know a storm was brewing, though.
Yeah.
In this stage of the game, we're on the run, and the situation seems impossible. I want to find out how we made our stand. Our next destination is just a little bit to the north, the Old Stone House. What happened here? It'll amaze you. Hey, stick around.
So this is a typical Brooklyn scene. You've got the beautiful brownstones right here. You've got the leaves on the trees changing. It's a nice fall morning. Back in 1776, it was anything but that. Our guys were in full retreat from the Greenwood Cemetery. They're trying to hop over the Gowanus Creek, which is in this direction. It's high tide. Some of them are drowning. And then these guys, the British, they're pounding them from up on this house. You've got a cannon up there. You've got snipers in the window. They're picking off our guys trying to cross a creek. I mean, that's dastardly. But then a group of soldiers from the Continental Army rush this place, and all of a sudden things start to change. So we're going to meet somebody right now who knows all about the battle. Kim Mayer, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It's a cool fall morning right now, but back in 1776, it didn't look like this at all, did it?
Oh, nothing like this whatsoever. Brooklyn has changed so dramatically over the last few hundred years.
Yeah, no kidding. From a population of around 5,000 in 1776 to over 2.7 million today.
So this building, the Old Stone House, which is located in Park Slope, is about 100 feet from its original location, and we're about 15 feet higher than we would have been at the time of the battle. The British had landed at Staten Island, and the Americans didn't know where the British were going to be. They were expecting the British to go up the East River, but they all landed at Staten Island and then came across. It looked like all of London was afloat. There were 400 ships of the line, and so Brooklyn, which was largely a Dutch colony at the time, about 270 Dutch families, were preparing for an invasion. Like many things, the battle was really determined by geography and by weather. The Americans had a very lightly guarded position at what is now Bushwick, Cemetery of the Evergreens. Most rural cemetery, movement cemeteries, these are at the top of the terminal moraine, which is a rocky outcropping that divides Brooklyn. So the British were going to create what eventually would be a pincer maneuver that would come around from the north and the south, culminating here around the Old Stone House.
So this is it right here.
This is it. This is where the culmination of the battle took place.
So at this point of the battle, the British had this place in firm control, and they are sniping our guys trying to get across the Gowanus Creek, trying to get to the Brooklyn Heights.
William Alexander, who was a general fighting on behalf of Washington, also known as Lord Stirling, realized that the British were about to enclose the Americans, cut off that escape route across the Gowanus. So he organized the Maryland Regiment to attack the British here around the house. And it was a fierce battle, back and forth, 3 times, but it left a route open across the Gowanus for the Pennsylvania Riflemen that were coming down from what's now Prospect Park, and the rest of the regiments, Connecticut and Delaware, to get across the Gowanus Swamp.
So the Maryland guys were the heroes. You guys actually fly the flag every day right here.
We do. We fly the Maryland flag every day because the Marylanders were the heroes of the Battle of Brooklyn, and we owe them a huge debt of gratitude and honor for the sacrifice that they made during the Battle of Brooklyn.
How many of those guys went down?
256 killed or missing.
So I'm picturing this. These guys are charging the British. They knew they were going to go down, but it allowed our army to retreat safely back into the Brooklyn Heights.
Exactly. They really knew that they were going to be giving their lives, and it kept an escape route open across the Gowanus for everyone else that needed to get behind the American line.
Meanwhile, the weather is still nice, but then the rain starts picking up later on in the evening.
Absolutely, and that really changed the outcome of the battle.
Forecasting mirrors what historians do. Recording and looking back on past conditions and comparing it to modern day, it's exciting to see history and weather just coming together like this.
We have this great diorama of the battle. If you look in here, you can see it shows the house still in its original location. which would have been about 100 feet from where we are now and about 15 feet lower in terms of geography. But you get the sense of this pincer maneuver because you have the Highlanders and Cornwallis's troops, and then you have Hessians, and then you have the Marylanders. Kind of.
They were all pinned in.
They're all pinned in.
These guys knew they were going to die.
They were very aware of the danger that they were heading into and the rush of battle.
So this house had possession from the Continentals to the British to the Continentals to the British, and it
Yes.
changed hands a couple times?
It did over the course of the morning. It was a very short battle, only about 4 hours.
That's it?
But really fierce because you had about 32,000 British soldiers and about 8,000 Americans, and it was a huge scrum that went all the way from Flatbush Avenue all the way down to Denise's Ferry near what's now the Verrazano Bridge.
Wow, and it was all the Maryland guys holding them off.
The Maryland guys, the Delaware guys,
Yeah.
the Pennsylvania guys up in Prospect Park, the Connecticut guys over in Greenwood Cemetery.
Bunch of badasses.
I think that they were probably more terrified than badass, but they were young, you
Yeah.
know. A lot of them were only like 14, 16, 17 years old.
You imagine what's going on right now. You've got the guys coming in from this direction. You got more British troops coming in from this direction. Meanwhile, the Maryland 400 guys are trying to stop the British from firing on our people. Our guys are in full retreat. We've got the British coming in every direction. The Marylanders are getting pushed this way to try and slow them down. It looks like Washington's troops are going to be just done for at the Brooklyn Heights. They need a miracle. And guess what? They get one. Heavy rain.
Neither army knew the weather was starting to ramp up. An early season nor'easter was in its formative stages. A nor'easter in August? Yep, that little ice age made for some crazy weather back then.
So here's what happens, and it's a miracle. The night of the 27th, heavy rain starts to fall. That stops the British from advancing and totally routing our guys. The rain keeps on going, the 28th through the 29th. The British can't go anywhere. The British try to move up the East River, but they can't because they've got a nor'easter winds blowing right in their face, so they can't even get up there to surround them. Where are they? They're all stuck in the harbor out there. 400 ships locked up because of the nor'easter. Can't get up there because of the wind. Washington's like, we're gonna get the heck out of here. On the 29th, that night, pitch black, starts rowing all his guys across, but it's taking way too long. And he's thinking to himself, this is gonna happen, this is gonna be bad. When the sun comes up, the British are gonna see that we're still here, so the wind is right in their face. They can't advance, they can't do anything. Washington thinks, all right, now's the time. We gotta get out of here.
New York City. Millions of people from different walks of life make their lives here. It took hundreds of years to build up, so all the 100,000 cars and 4,000 pedestrians can cross a Brooklyn Bridge every day. But right here, in late August 1776, this future is in jeopardy. The Revolutionary War and America itself are nearly lost.
So this is August 29th, 1776, just after the Battle of Brooklyn on August 27th, 1776. And after the battle, a huge nor'easter comes and sweeps through the area. Rain, wind, and unfavorable winds for the British Navy. The East River over here, pretty much impassable for a long time, until the 29th. And that's when Washington decided to evacuate his army across the East River to Manhattan Island. And if they were discovered during this retreat, the war could have been over right then and there.
So what saved them?
What saved them was the weather. It's really, really crazy. By divine intervention or just a stroke of luck, the nor'easter made it unfavorable winds for the British Navy, that was just parked outside of Staten Island. They couldn't sail up in the harbor to cut off Washington from the water. But as luck provided, a nice dense fog covered the entire East River and Brooklyn Heights, so the other soldiers could escape basically undetected. Washington said, okay, let's evacuate. After he had his council with all his officers, that's when they started moving those 9,000 soldiers across. There were soldiers on Manhattan Island too.
Right.
Part of Washington's army was there, but they had to evacuate the main body of their army that was here, that was soundly beaten from the Battle of Brooklyn.
When did that fog lift?
The fog lifted, as the story goes, right after the last troops entered Manhattan Island. According to legend, General George Washington was on that last boat.
Whether fact or a little fiction, it's easy to see why General Washington became President Washington.
So that fog, it sets up right at the very last second that they needed it.
Yes, it's on a what should be now a nice summer day, and fog just rolls in. And it's like basically walking through a cloud. I think one British soldier claimed it perfectly, that you couldn't see a man 6 feet in front of you. That's how dense the fog was on the morning of August 30th, 1776.
It's awesome. And I'm thinking, we usually don't get nor'easters in the late August, but we're right in the middle of the Little Ice Age.
Yes, that is correct.
Patrick even brought to my attention another storm that played a part in the lead up to the battle. A little over a week earlier, on August 21st, what many consider to be a once-in-a-lifetime storm delayed the British from crossing over from Staten Island to Brooklyn. One man remarked, "The storm raged for 3 hours, yet strangely, the cloud appeared to stand still and swing round and around all over the city. The lightning fell in masses and sheets of fire to the earth and seemed to strike incessantly and on every side."
Who knows what would have happened if that fog did not set over the East River? The British could have recognized that the Americans weren't in their camps anymore. They could have charged right through Brooklyn Heights, and it could have been all over. The United States could have ended, the American Revolution could have ended right where we're standing here on Brooklyn Heights.
So let's recap.
We need a revolution.
On the night of the 29th, it's pitch black. It's still raining out. You can't see too much. He says, "We are going to get across that river and escape to the Manhattan side." But it's taken too long.
And when the sun comes up, the British are going to see that we are getting out of here, and they're going to attack, and they're going to wipe us out. Then a miracle happens. The nor'easter settles in over the warm waters of the East River. A real dense fog bank forms. Nobody can see anything. Washington's like, this is fantastic. So when the sun finally did come up and the fog begins to disperse, the British storm the old lines where the United States Army used to be. What do they find? Nothing. Jack squat. Washington successfully retreated, got all his troops, all 9,500 of them, across the river that night. That was a miracle that saved, essentially, the Continental Army.
Without that, America, as we know it, would not be here.
Thanks, buddy. So, Gary, you like Brooklyn, right?
I do.
You serve British food?
British? Definitely not.
They were young, they were inexperienced, they were beaten badly, but thanks to a shrewd decision by Washington and fate smiling down in the form of an early season nor'easter and fog, the American Army lived to fight another day. Thanks to the weather that day, we don't have to suffer eating British cuisine. But the war was not over yet, and the weather still had major roles to play as friend and foe to the American Army. Washington ultimately goes to Jersey, but the weather still stinks. But that's another story for the next time.